Good luck.
Hello? Are we on? I can't tell. I think
I don't
so.
know.
Maybe.
It doesn't let me play. Oh, yeah, we're on.
Yay.
I see.
So we took off a week because I went on vacation. Did you do anything fun last week? Or is it just me?
Good luck. I worked on dragons, and then I worked on more dragons.
Hello?
And then after that, I continued working on dragons. I finished writing the dragons.
Really?
That doesn't mean they're done, because we have to lay them out, and we're gonna write sidebars to copy fit and all sorts of fun things. But that was pretty exciting, right?
How many dragons? So how many feats approximately are in this dragon book, supposedly?
So I checked how many times the word feat appears, and it's like 460, but sometimes that's like you gain the such and such a feat as a bonus feat, and neither of those is an actual feat. So I'm gonna estimate that maybe 300 of those 450 uses of the word feat are from like feat 6, because it's a feat. So that, if that's true, which I'm not sure, it's got to be at least 200, right? Like I did a random sample of the first 100 times that the word feat appeared, and 90 of them were actually feats, and only 10 were like the word feat appearing in body text. So if that continues, it actually is more than 300, which is absurd for an ancestry plus some archetypes, right? Like, these archetypes have more feats than classes usually have. Now, to be fair, there's 45 dragon heritages, so like any individual character doesn't have to decide between 300 feats, because like there might like half of them are probably only available, or maybe more than half are probably only available to like one or a few types of dragons, because when you have 45 types of dragons, it does tend to give you more feats.
So I don't even know. I mean, there's so many feats. I don't think you'll be able to actually play all these dragon types in your lifetime, even if you wanted to. There's just too much. I think we might have actually gone too far the other way. That's possible.
You mean made too much stuff?
We gave them too much. There might be too much.
I was always saying we could do an incremental approach, and one thing I really like about working with you is that you're always like, no, we're gonna do all of it. We'll just do everything you thought of, and then we'll add more that are new. So,
well, you want.
I said we could do it with 10 dragons. Actually, I first said we could do a little small PDF with 5, and then you're like, well, let's do all 10 of the core chromatic and metallics. And then you're like, you know what, Mark? Let's do all of the ones that have come out in PF2. That would be 20. And then you're like, actually, how about all 39 that existed ever in Pathfinder? And you're like, what about 5 more for a new wild dragon category? And then 1 more created by a celebrity. So we wound up, that one was only because the Kickstarter unlocked some of those last ones. But it wound up being quite a bit longer than I originally thought it was going to be when I pitched to you, and I was like, we could write a short PDF that's like an ancestry with some little archetypes that covers some of the most famous dragons.
Well,
and now it's going to be over 100 pages easily, by a significant amount.
Oh yeah. I don't even know. I was doing the math because I don't know how big it's going to be. It's probably 120, 130 pages at least. And depending on layout and art, because there's a lot of art. I did the layout of the lore, and I only used half of the art. I actually used a little less than half.
It's like, yeah, I mean, it should be less than half, because there should be 45 art pieces in the lore, one for each of the lore. But it's about 67,500 words without the sidebars that are going to appear in the lore section, which will add a fair amount of words that will be written during copy fit, because there's no point guessing what those sidebars are going to be when you have dragons with wings that are like going everywhere.
How big is an average Paizo book? Like, if I were to guess, because I'm actually curious. I know how big adventures are, but like, these like Guns and Gears or Mwangi. I mean, Mwangi is pretty big. I mean, this is a pretty big book.
I want to point out that our art density is higher than Guns and Gears, because of the fact that we have that section of lore that has a piece of art on every page.
Right.
And we have more than a piece per 2 pages on average in the rest.
Correct.
If you were writing, and Guns and Gears actually has a fair number of like 2-pagers and 1-page intros that I'm not taking into account for. So if you have no intros and you have no art dense sections and you're just doing like kind of the standard, a whole bunch of like rulesy stuff. And lore can actually fit more words per page because it doesn't have like those headers and things like that. So if you're just doing a bunch of rulesy stuff, then you're gonna wind up with like, and no half page, or just like one full body and rulesy stuff. Let me see. Then Guns and Gears would be. This is obviously overestimating the words in Guns and Gears. It clearly doesn't have this many. It would be like 140,000. But since it has 2-page arts, 1-page openers. It's 224 pages. It has 2-page arts, 1-page openers. It has certain sections that have more art than that, so it's going to be less than that. But it's 224 pages. We're not 224 pages, so we're going to wind up probably being about half the number of words of Guns and Gears by the end of it. And that is a lot.
What about the Absalom book? How many words is this sucker? Oh my god.
I don't even know, because a lot of that's not rules. A lot of it. It's actually body text, lore text, so you fit more.
So much text in this book.
You fit more per page with that. So like that Absalom book's gonna be long. I don't know. I can't even guess how long it is exactly, but I can give you a basic actually, because it wouldn't have enough art for one every 2 pages because it got expanded so much.
Pages.
It's 400 pages, but does it actually have 200 pieces of art?
Oh my god!
So if it does, then it would probably be about like 280,000 words. But I think there's a lot of sections where like it expanded so much, but more art wasn't expanded to it necessarily. That maybe more than 280,000. That's just like a guess.
We're looking. So let's see. I don't know how big Battles Your Bestiary was in terms of size. I have to do a word count. I don't remember, but the Dragon book will probably be after sidebars, and we're gonna have to do sidebars in the Ancestry area too, by the way, because I'm gonna have it look very similar to the Ancestry guide. So we'll have a little sidebars here and there and stuff.
We wrote sidebars in advance for that because there are certain types of sidebars that a new Ancestry like kind of always has, and so we've got those, and I wrote some extra sidebars in there just in case, just for fun stuff.
So we'll figure
I'm sure there'll be more, but when it comes to the lore, there's almost pretty much guaranteed to be a sidebar on every page.
Yeah, just about. And so I'll say 70,000. So maybe 70,000 words.
That's probably a good guess for what it'll be, and that would be like half of Guns and Gears, which my estimate for what Guns and Gears has anyway. Like I don't know how many it actually is. Now Battles of Bestiary is 173 pages long, but it does have a full piece of art on a lot of the pages, even more than Dragons does, because it's a bestiary. So it's gonna have fewer words than Battle Zoo Bestiary does, but the difference is that Battle Zoo Bestiary was written by like a lot of contestants, and I wrote every word of this dragon book.
Wow, good. Wow, that's a good thing. It's actually so here's the amazing thing about this
I've never done an adventure path for Paizo, so I hadn't had to do like a book that was this long that was only written by me. So I've now fulfilled that that sort of milestone of like write a ridiculously long book, and it's longer than an adventure path.
This book is going to have the absolute craziest masthead, because it's going to have. It's actually a funny masthead. I was looking at it.
It's going to have just me for the main author, but it has additional design for the celebrity person that we got.
Other author.
One other additional design for coming up with the design ideas for The Last Dragon.
Well, here's the crazy part. All the art, one person.
It's that one amazing author. What was his name? Firaz? Or?
Yeah. I closed my browser, but he did every single piece in this book. It's mind-boggling. except the cover. The cover is actually done by the cover was done by someone else. He actually does a lot of my work.
Was the cover done by Sheppy, who does a lot of the covers?
No,
Okay.
Sheppy's busy right now. Sheppy is doing his Kickstarter, so he's actually really busy.
Well, I'm glad he's doing well with his Kickstarter. Sheppy's awesome.
Yeah, I had the cover also done before I met this new artist, but so this entire book is done by like 2 people. It's like you and one artist, and that's it.
Yeah, there you go.
But the playtesters, the playtest section is going to be like this big. It's going to be very, very, very big. So that. But I will say the Indigo Isles. Oh my God, I think I made a mistake. Indigo Isles
book is going to be so much longer than like Steven was like, "Hey everyone,
it's going to be
Firat Solhan." There you go.
100,000 words. That book.
Yeah. And at first you were like,
words.
"Hey, each author, here's what I need you to write. It'll probably be like 20,000 or so words." And it was like the amount of content and adventure that Steven wanted everyone to get was a lot more than 20,000 words worth. And so every section went over by about the same amount as each other. And so it's going to be
it's so comprehensive though. It's really good. Like as someone who runs I'm trying to do the math. I've run, I mean, easily hundreds, not thousands of adventures, but I mean, if I average out, I basically run approximately 5 hours a week from my life. I mean, that's a lot of, I mean, it's a lot. I've GM'd a lot. And so everything I ever wanted to put into a book, I did. And basically I just made sure that there was everything in there for the GM so that this can be run however you want. And then obviously there's a lot of logic. Like I've been incredibly impressed by that, because when I've run adventures before, I always find things that are like, and I don't want to nitpick too much, like the adventures I've run, the pre-published, are amazing adventures. They're fun, and my players tell a story about them for years. But it'll always be something like, in this adventure path, in one version, or in the Jade Region adventure path, the people who retreated from the takeover of Menkai by the Onis, like a guy came with his little son, and that son grew up, and he had a daughter, and the daughter is like 20 something, right? And the son who grew up is like 50 something. But on the other side of the people who actually usurped the throne, like all the people who originally usurped the throne are still there, and they're like 30. And so like the years don't match up, because it was part 1 and part 6, and like that's minor, right? And it's an amazingly fun AP. But what really impressed me in this one is just your and like, as Linda's going through, and you and Linda do back and forth attention to detail with like a map that has like all of these mile markers and little I saw one that had like all these little lines that be like, this is this much distance, and that is that much distance, and this is the route that they have to go through here, but why wouldn't they travel through that route, which is faster? And it's all accounted for. And for me, I really like that. I think actually, if anyone's playing Elden Ring out there, which is so freaking good, this adventure path is similar to Elden Ring in the sense that Elden Ring is an open world, but they heavily structure it so that you sort of have to go in the right direction. If you want, you can go in the wrong direction and go to the wrong area. There's nothing preventing you, but if you do, you will die, because the game is so hard. And they do it on and I did. I'm like, oh, let me go over here. And I'm like, I am in the wrong place. I know that this is an advanced area. Let me fire a magic missile at one of these monsters. And then I see like its health bar go down like 1%.
That's true in Dark Souls as well. Although actually, the thing that was really funny, I played Dark Souls 1 for a while, and
Elden Ring is so good.
It's famous for having a graveyard that leads into an area that's like really end game, that's right at the beginning. Except here's the thing. I played Dark Souls at like way later than most everyone else, after it was just a famous series and there were 3 in the thing, and everyone just said, this is the hardest game you've ever played. It's going to kill you 1,000,000 times. It's impossible or whatever. So I did not realize that was supposed to be too hard.
Right.
So I killed all of the skeletons. I made it down into that end game area. It was brutal because there were like mages that would revive all of the enemies unless I got to them, and I actually beat that without realizing that it was the wrong way. I was just like, wow, everyone was right. Dark Souls is really, really hard. And then I went to the place I was supposed to go. I was like, oh, Dark Souls isn't actually that hard. I was just being weird.
If you go the wrong order, but what I'm saying about this is in Elden Ring, this is what I did in the adventure, is that like all these authors, and they do it, and I'm not blaming any author, is that they assume that the PCs are going to go in the order written. And like there is a part in the adventure where they have to get from point A to point B. And they have to go a very specific route. I'm not telling any spoilers here. And there are lots of ways to get there. You don't have to go from point A to point B. You can go 10 other ways. And no, and Patrick didn't write anything about those 10 other ways. Now, assuming, you know, you as a GM would figure it out, but I was like, no, let's go back. And I'm going to put in, like, you want to go this way? This is what happens. You want to go this way? This is what happens. You want to go this way? This is what happens. Like, we actually outline what happens if you go the wrong way. And some of it is warnings, like nice warnings, like, oh, you see like a swarm of creatures over there, and you realize there is no way you're living, you know, like, it's like you are just not getting past that. And more importantly, we're using logic. It's that, okay, well, those creatures, they're there because of this event that's occurring. So again, as I don't want it to be like, oh, that's just you blocking the player. That's like you just like gaming the system. But it's like, no. Like, you have to go from point A to point B because that is the way that you want to ford the river. It's just like fording a river. It's like, okay, you can ford the river anywhere you want, but you probably want to do it the place where everyone does the fording and there's only like an inch of water, and not by the rapids over there or the waterfall in the other direction. And that's basically what's taking up a lot of space, is that we go that extra step of putting in everything that the GM needs so that they can run the game. And they might never ever use it, but it's good as a GM to have those tools and know in their head how to anticipate, because I also play with game breakers and like rules lawyers. I mean, my group is, I mean, they're literally lawyers. I mean, like, you know, one of the guys who I play with, not only is he an expert GM, but he's an actual lawyer. So between those two, I am used to answering the most esoteric, out of the box, craziest questions you've ever heard. So I just thought, now what would they do? And then how would I counter
my
it?
secret advice to all of you is that anytime Steven has people put in more of this stuff, it's really good for you.
Oh yeah.
If you have gone to BackerKit or go to http battlezoo.com, because he decided what the price was back when he thought it was like the other side. So every time he adds something to it, if you buy it at the current like price,
it did actually raise. The prices actually did raise. Dragon Book is going up. The bestiary went up. Everything actually went up since the backer kit. A, because of inflation. B, because of shipping. And
right, because of the global shipping crisis.
Yeah, I mean, we just made it just a little bit. Just a little bit.
It's not at the final price. No. It's at a lower price.
Yeah, if you go to
Battlezoo.com, you can take advantage of the fact that he's adding this stuff, which has not been completely counted.
Yeah, the Indigo Isles with the adventure path. The adventure and the player's guide will probably be 250,000 words. Probably actually a little more than that, but that's going to be 500 pages.
Yeah, we'll see.
And I have to lay that out. Oh gosh, that is going to suck.
So we've given them some good sneak peeks at the process for Battlezoo. Should we roll into session 1? What do you think?
How to run a successful session 1 for D&D or Pathfinder.
Now, we're actually, honestly,
or anything.
Pretty much any tabletop RPG that you're playing. Just like Steven put D&D in the name because it's D&D and people know what that is. But
I put D&D in every name.
This is actually something that kind of applies to most. I mean, there are some games that are so different in role playing that maybe some of these tips don't apply, but a lot of these apply to all of them. So one of the most important things you need to take into account when you're running a session 1. So first of all, we kind of assume you've listened to our other videos, and even if you haven't, that's fine. But that you follow the advice from our other videos and have a session 0 at least, and possibly a session -1 to figure out all the things like logistics and what is being played and how who the group are, and that's already sorted, and that you've managed to schedule a game and you're playing it and it's session 1. But also you need to know, and you will know because if you did the session 0 and -1 stuff, how does this group play together? And by which I mean, has everyone in this group already played together before, and this is just a new group, a new game for that group? Is it a group that's mostly played together, but there's one or two new people? Is it completely nobody has played together before and you're getting together for the first time? So that's one of the questions you need to know the answer to. And if you do, then that will determine what you're going to do in session 1. And then the second is, has anyone in this group played this particular tabletop RPG before? Is it nobody has, not even you? Are you, the GM, the only one who knows it and not any of the players? Maybe have most of them played it, but not a few who are maybe the new ones to the group? Or has everyone's done this before, maybe multiple times, and you know how the game works? Because answering those two questions are going to determine what your priorities are in session 1. The key to a session 1 is that you need to take into account the needs of your group, and those needs vary based on your answer to those two questions. And you need to vary the way that you run the game in the first session in order to achieve those needs and really build yourself up a really good starting momentum for the group. So, for example, if the people in your group don't know the game system, then you probably want to give them some ability at the beginning of session 1 to kind of do what would be like the video game tutorial that's become ubiquitous. Instead of having like a manual with things written down, is like an in-game tutorial, but you can run that too in your session 1 by doing something like, hey, maybe you have people like help out, like stacking books in the library and like moving things around, and they have to use the 3-action economy, or they have to use some other part of Pathfinder 2nd edition, right? Or learn their proficiencies in D&D to see who's good at handling things in a library. Something low-key, and then a very low-key first combat that is actually possibly trivially easy, just so it's like, hey, learn the combat mechanics, see how things work. If you're playing Pathfinder 2nd, you might be able to learn a little bit more about the fact that you can take 3 actions per turn, and it's not a great idea to just swing with your sword, because that last one's going to be inaccurate. So something to warm people up, to get them to learn, to get them into it, is important if they don't know the game. If they do, then sure, you can just do whatever you want in terms of that. But you might need, if they know the game but they don't know each other, you might need icebreakers, spend more time talking about their characters, different people's, having different people do like a little prologue at the beginning. And you might even consider, whether they know the game or not, something like playing 0 level prologue that happens before the events of the main campaign. It's like everyone was younger and they're apprentices and they met up, or figure out how the party got together. So those are sort of things that you might do in session 1, depending on whether or not your group are experienced or not, and whether they've sort of gamed together or not.
Wow.
What do you think, Stephen? What's your number one tip for
that? Was a good tip, to the point that even I was like, wow, that's good, because I never play with new people. And if I do, occasionally I'll bring in one person new, but usually when I do with that is I'll put that person next to somebody who is friendly and will be willing to teach them the rules. And this happened at Gen Con, as I had a friend there, and we were playing actually Pathfinder 2nd edition for the first time, and where I killed Param in one hit, which was fun.
Oh no!
Oh god, it was
his
great.
Character or actual Param?
Both.
Oh no!
Well, it was a trap, and the trap went off, and he was the only character in the room. And I rolled 3 attacks, and I rolled a 19, a 19, and a 19.
Whoa!
And the trap doesn't have
Multiple attack penalty.
Right. So it was like crit, crit, crit. You're dead. You're dead. You're dead. So,
My goodness.
Anyhow, back to the game. They didn't know how to play, so I sat them next to actually Lauren, who is on the show, and she knows the game very well. Even back then, she knew very well, and she was continuously teaching this person how to play. And and it was a society game, and that I've done, but everyone I play with have been playing for 100 million years. So if anything, I'm at the other end. I'm like, okay, you wake up dead. Now what? Like, I'm like, I'm on the other way. But for newcomers, I would say the number one tip is what type of game are you playing and what is the goal? Because funny enough, if you're playing a society game, every game is a session one, unless it's like a two-parter or something. So you are always having one game and only one game. And with society games, which is probably the most session ones I have, it's nerve-wracking, especially even as a GM, because you don't know who these people are. You don't know what characters they're bringing. You don't know what abilities they have. You don't know what everything has. And I will give an example of something that happened to me at Gen Con that I found that made my session ones go way better for Pathfinder Society or any Society Starfinder, doesn't matter, is that I got a group. God, I can't believe this. I got a group, and this is when what's it? The legendary Mythic came out, the Mythic rules, and I ran that Mythic adventure at Gen Con, and everyone at my table was level 11. They all been playing together, Pathfinder First Edition, and this was their last game together as a group because then they were going to come level 12. And they were so overpowered and breaking the game in so many ways that it was not fun for me. It wasn't fun for them. I mean, it was like, oh, I attack. And then the girl she literally had like a box of dice because she was an archer. And she's like, I'm rolling. And it was like 50 dice. And I'm like, oh, I do like 500 points of damage. I'm like, okay, you win. You all win, Pathfinder. Like, it was actually a very depressing session because there was this meeting in this like tavern, and the guy had a sword, and he used the sword, a mithril sword, and then he like destroyed all the pillars and brought the tavern down. And he's like, and then they get to a dungeon and they tunnel through the dungeon to get to the end. I'm like, guys, what are you doing? Like, this is like not even fun. Like, what is your
adamantine sword?
Yeah, adamantium. And I was like, what are you guys doing? It's like, this is not even fun. And I thought a lot about that session because at the end, I mean, they seemed okay with it. And man, I was like, but I had a terrible time. So a year goes by and I'm running it again, and a new group shows up, 11th level, and this is their last game together. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's like 2 years in a row. But this time, this is what I did. I sat down. I said, okay, guys, let's talk. You are very powerful. You can break this game as much as you want. I get it. Do you want to have fun? Or do you actually want to like just power through this and tunnel through the, the dungeon to the end? Like, do you actually want to play for fun? Like, don't OP, don't go crazy, let's just have a good time. And they all agreed. And it was a fantastic time. Like, everyone had a great time. And I saw it on their faces that something would happen and they would be like, I can get out of this using one of my million special abilities, but I'm not going to. Let's see how this goes. I'm going to almost gimp myself and play at a lower level. And it was a fantastic. It was as good as the other session was bad. My point being is that the session one, and this is something you kind of do with session 0, but it's Pathfinder Society, session 0 and session 1 are kind of the same, is that make sure everyone is there for the same reasons and everyone you want to get the same thing out. Now, again, you could have done this at session 0, and you probably did. I would still do it at session 1 anyhow, and just say, okay, everyone, we're going to start, and we're going to just like, and you can just say, like what you said, it's like, we're going to start off, it's going to start off kind of easy. We're just going to like, get our bearings. Everyone's going to find out who we are. And you can tell them what to expect in the session. There's nothing wrong with that. And that way they're not antsy. They're not like on pins and needles worried that they're going to be ambushed and killed in the very first session, which I've also seen happen. Actually, first session, first encounter, they walked in, ran into a trap, died. And I was like, oh, that's it. Your game's over. That was fun. Actually, twice. That happened twice. Now I think about it. So, you kind of give them a heads up of what to expect. I think everyone can relax because I think everyone's nervous on a session one. The GM's nervous, the players are nervous,
Right.
even if you've been playing together. And I think you just have to bring it down and just like bring everyone down.
It's about a social contract.
Yeah.
If I could summarize like the moral of your story of that adventure in the 2 times is that you need to know what everyone at the table finds as fun. And that may be something that they don't know yet if they haven't played the game.
Mm-hmm.
And if they've only done session 0, they can guess.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes players don't self-identify.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually it's fascinating that they don't self-identify, and it can sometimes lead to some issues.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, you were talking about a lot of players, and I'm included in this, have more fun if there's a challenge and you overcome it.
Mm-hmm.
But there are actually also a lot of players who have more fun if they just are like Superman in a game without kryptonite, where they just kind of win everything pretty much automatically and blow through it. There are players who are like that. And then there's the non-self-identifying group who kind of say that they want a challenge, and they do. Like, they feel that they want a challenge, but they want it to have been said to be a very difficult challenge, but then also to win easily. And those are players that are very difficult to satisfy, because they don't want it to be known to be a cakewalk. They want it to have been clearly a challenge that they also cakewalked, because then they feel like, they, through their tactics or their character build or something like that, they were able to do something that was hard, but it was still easy. They wanted to have both. So sometimes you'll find out that about yourself as a player, and you didn't know it at first, and you thought, no, I just want a challenge, and you realize actually though, if it's really a challenge at the end, even after we put everything into it, it's still a little too stressful. And I've seen players who have eventually realized that after a certain amount of playing for like many hours. So it's not always something you'll know until you get into the game. So gauging it is important. Ask people to tell you what they think. That's the best way to learn, other than by experience. Yeah. And that's for difficulty levels, but that's also just for what kind of things to include in the game. You might have figured it out in session 0 what people said they wanted to do, but then when you actually start playing in session 1, you find out that actually the person who said, they were more interested in combat, but they really got into it with the person who was a role player, really brought them into it and made them think about their character more, and now they actually have gotten a little more interested in the role-playing scenes.
Yeah, I'm thinking, like, from a very general point of view, because there's so many different games. There's like, you're playing an adventure path, the session 1 could be different if you're playing a, Pathfinder Society than session 0. If you're playing an adventure, it's different. If you're playing with a group of players and they're starting off at like level 13, that's a very different, that's a very different session 1. So I'm thinking probably the main things I would take away from a session 1 is, 1, you want to just reiterate the social contract of like what we're going to be doing. It's like, what's the goal is of this session, what you're going to be doing, because you don't want anyone to have expectations either ruined or that they're expecting that, oh, I'm going to be going in and doing shopping for the next 2 hours. Right. You should have been doing that at session 0. Like, and if they're like, I really want to do it, like someone's insisting, well, I need to buy my weapons because I didn't buy anything. Well, if you're the GM, it's like, fine, you know what? Here's your starting kit. If you need more stuff, we'll take care of it later. It's like, don't stop the session. You got to have it always keep moving. You got to get everyone engaged. And as you said, you got to keep it really simple. And if there's one thing I've noticed in almost all Paizo adventure paths, is one of the things they do, especially if you're level 1, and they do a good job at this, is that almost always they start out either with a very simple combat or like a fair, and then they have to do things like social encounters, or you have to
or a
do
moose that kills you.
or a moose that kills you. But usually, as long as it's not a dungeon crawl, you have social encounters or very simple combats that will get you from level 1 to level 2 to even level 3. Like they have very kid gloves, and they have not too much deadly encounters in the first couple of levels.
Or at least we hope so.
Yeah. Now that's not always true, because if you're doing a dungeon crawl, well, and in my case, where I did the Emerald Spire, and Bob Marquis walked forward and a goblin shot him and critted him and hit him in the head and killed him.
Oh my gosh.
And the very first round of combat and the very first attack. And I was like, well, there you go. Like, welcome to Emerald Spire. But, you know, it's like you got to know what you're in for. But yeah, I would say that the session 1 is that everyone just has to like know that they're in to have fun, and that you shouldn't be going crazy and worry about your character. In fact, and this is a long time ago, like 20 years ago, I had a session 1, and my Seth was the GM from the Roll for Combat show, and he had everyone shop, and the entire session 1 was shopping. And after that, we never had a session 2, because everyone was like, we wanted to play. Like, we didn't want to do a shopping expedition. Now, this was Dungeons & Dragons first edition, which is a whole other story. And that's like, that's the Dark Souls of role-playing games. Like,
yeah, that's where like you said you were checking, but you didn't say you checked under the rug. So
like, you have no
idea. The thing
idea.
from
Like,
under the rug kills you.
People think D&D first edition's hard. Like, very few people have truly played it. It's like playing Dark Souls blindfolded. It is so freaking hard and so ridiculous that you could spend a week shopping if you wanted to. The point is that no one knew what they wanted to do, and the GM assumed, let's get shopping and get ready for the adventure, and everyone had a bad time and we never came back. So you just have to make sure that you are very cognizant of what you want to do as the player too. Like, you can tell the player, okay, in fact, last night I ran a game and they were in an extreme encounter, not severe, extreme. You're not even supposed to have extreme encounters in Pathfinder.
The only ones that you're supposed to have, if at all, are like the very final boss. Or something like that. It's like, and even then, it's like you might not want to do that, but you could.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is, like, before the combat, we spent like, and it's almost like a session 1. I was like, okay, guys, I'm going to tell you right now, like, this is a hard encounter. This is extreme. I'm not kidding, because I don't want them to. Because they're in this game, I know these guys, they're in the game to be challenged. So I'm giving them what they need to know. It's like playing a video game and saying, oh, I'm going to play the hard difficulty. Like, I'm telling you, this is going to be a hard encounter. You guys have 2 rounds to prepare. What do you want to do? And I let them spend a good hour going through their tactics. Now, is it realistic? No, of course not. It's not realistic. It's like, it's supposedly you only have 12 seconds. But that's not the point.
But you know what? Their characters, though, are spending every day together talking about tactics
and they knew
around the
doing.
campfire at night, and you guys aren't doing that every day.
Right.
So I think it is. I mean, it wouldn't be realistic if you told them exactly what they were fighting and then they had an hour to plan. But if you just said there's going to be a hard fight and they don't know what it is,
they saw the bad
I think
guy.
It's reasonable that they would have had an hour. They would have had, you know, hours to talk about what would we do if we found a really hard opponent. What would we do differently?
So I let them do it, and more importantly, here's the most important thing: they had fun. They like doing it. Like, they like sitting there and planning everything out.
My players love that too.
Yeah, and that's what's important.
I've played with some people, some of whom like are some of my coworkers at Paizo would tear their hair out if they played with my home group, because they would not like that. And it just everyone's got their own play style. I want to circle back to something really, really important that you said previously, talking about what if it's a Pathfinder Society scenario or an adventure path. So you should think about what you're doing in session 0. I talked about 2 questions to ask. Are the players new to each other? Are they new to the game? But Steven's question is super important, which is, what is the scope of what you're doing? If you're, and you can think about it almost in the same way as, obviously you're not making a movie or a TV show, but the same way that people who are writers for movies and TV shows have to structure things out. If you are doing a Pathfinder society scenario with a new group of people who are not going to play together again after that, your session 1 is also the only session. It's like an episodic TV show that doesn't have a lot of continuity. And you're just doing one episode of that viewers are supposed to be able to come in without context and figure it out. If you're doing an adventure path, this is a movie, and you might be doing like the very first scene in your session 1, like, you know, you doing something very different between those two situations. You can't use your session 1 as a tutorial / rising tension, seed a few things in the plot, show people off stuff if it's the only session, for example. So when you're doing I was talking a little bit more about doing a session 1 on a longer campaign. But if you're doing a session 1 for something very short, a one-off, or Pathfinder Society where the characters may persist but your group might not, then you need to think about what needs to be done to compact what usually would be that long mythic narrative arc into one session. And so there's a few things you want to do there. So first of all, you can use ritualized ways of playing in order to compact what normally would take a longer amount of time. So sometimes getting to know each other's characters, I talked about earlier, you know, you might do a little scene to show everyone from back in time or how each person got to the group. If you have one session, you could just go around the table in a circle of the real world people at the table and have them introduce their character, their name, what they look like, and if they want to role play in character, have them say something to the group and just go around. So you're basically trying to use narrative techniques to accelerate what needs to be done so that it's done in that single session. Similarly, when you're doing a long campaign, you have characters who, you know, they have a backstory, they have some personality traits, but they're going to learn and grow, and their traits may change, and the story may have twists in it. But in a single session that's episodic, you want to instead have a character with like a very noticeable facet to their personality, maybe a shtick even. Doesn't have to be a shtick, but just some kind of thing that they do that is recognizable, that will stand out and is memorable, even within a single session. And that by the end of the session, people know, oh yeah, it's that character, rather than just like, you know, you were on your own personal journey that may go through 30 of these single episodes, you know, single adventures, all of which are with different people who never see it and they don't understand it. That can still be fulfilling for you. And I'm not saying not to do that too, but you want to have something that stands out, because in the same way that those episodic shows often have just like, you know, like a big action scene, and they may have like very comedic over the top things if it's a sitcom, or something like that. So consider your venue and your length, like Steven said before, and make sure your session 1 is tailored to be the correct prologue to your entire game, or in the case of a single session game, to be everything that you're going to do.
Yeah, and it's also different because I run almost all pre-written adventures. I don't really run anything just created by myself, sort of. But I like to run pre-written adventures, and society is very tight in their adventures because it's like everyone has to run the adventure the exact same way. But if you're doing your own adventure and you're running something homebrewed, a session 1's even more nerve-wracking because you're like, okay, I gotta hook everyone, I gotta like, you know, figure out how to get everyone involved, like what's the main story, why are they here. A few tricks is just check out adventure paths. Adventure paths are pretty good, especially the first books. I would say they're really good at showing you how to bring people into the world and introducing
especially
them.
with the player's guides. You might want to consider making a mini player's guide for your own campaign. That's like how Paizo does it for their adventure paths. It doesn't have to be as like bells and whistles as Paizo player's guide, right? But some of the same stuff, like give some tips, be like, hey, this adventure takes place entirely underwater, so you maybe want to play someone who can breathe underwater. That's a good thing to know. That would have appeared in a Paizo player's guide. Or some backgrounds that are going to be extra cool because you know that if they take one of these backgrounds, that the lore and the things from the background is going to tie directly in and make their character a great fit. And be like, you don't have to take them, but these are extra good for this one if you want to.
So the other thing I would say as a good tip, first of all, I mean, I actually say this a lot on my podcast, is that I study, personally, I study screenwriting a lot. And there's a lot of tips and tricks you can steal. There's a lot of books out there on screenwriting, and you can just even just watch some videos on, like, you know, Screenwriting 101. They do a lot of things to get you hooked into a series or into a show quickly, and you could do the same thing. I mean, I won't get into all of that. It's my dog knocking on the door because she wants to come in. But one of the also masters of this is also Stephen King, is that he does this thing in the beginning of most of his books where he starts with a cliffhanger. And for example, it might be something like, oh yeah, you know, I went to the fair and I had a good time and we played, you know, the skee ball and my kids won some Cupid dolls and we went on the rides. It was a shame that I died that day. And then you're like, what? And you're like, okay. And then it starts. That's like the start of the book. So you're like, okay, what the heck just happened? But he does it. He always hooks with these huge cliffhangers right in the beginning to get you involved in the story. And I like doing that personally. I like, you know, a lot of Paizo adventures start off with a combat or someone dying. In fact, almost every adventure I've run, a dwarf has died in the very first encounter and thing that happens. If you think about the Fall of Plague Stone, dwarf dies. Dead Sons, dwarf dies. What is it? Extinction Curse, dwarf dies. The very first thing. And I'm starting to see a pattern.
I'm thinking about this. Do you know the TV trope, the Worf effect? Not the WHORF Worf effect with an H, where it's like, does Worfs appear? Does language influence stop? But the WORF Worf effect, which is like, Worf from Star Trek is supposed to be the toughest guy around, but he gets beat up every time to show you how dangerous your opponents are.
Right.
Is this the dwarf effect?
It's kind of
where dwarves are tough and have high constitution, and so they get beat up to show you just how high the stakes are. It's like, oh my gosh, it even defeated a dwarf.
It's I don't know. You guys, this is your event. The funny thing is, this happened 3 times in a row. Like, who hates dwarves? Who hates dwarves?
Maybe, I don't know. Like, I mean, I know at least some people at Paizo like dwarves, and some people at Paizo like elves and don't like dwarves. Like, there's a huge variety of people's opinions on every different ancestry.
It's a good hook. I mean, it's a good hook. It's like, I mean, I'm not giving anything away. Extinction Curse, you're about to go out. You're about to put on the show. The Ringmaster's about to go out. He's dead. Show must go on. Who's in charge?
Well, so I don't blame that on him being a dwarf. Just like anytime you're gonna do a circus thing, the Ringmaster is always dead.
But the point is like,
anytime I can think of a circus being in some character's backstory, it's like the Ringmaster or like some of the performers have been killed.
Oh yeah.
Or like the headline performers or the Ringmaster are killed. It's just like that's sort of its own trope, but I guess it could be a combo because it's also a dwarf.
Or if you read if anyone saw the Jack Reacher miniseries on Amazon, which is really good, by the way. It starts off very similar, like blah, 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 major death. And you're like, okay, I'm hooked. And it was a major, you know, like a lot of these movies and TV shows usually start off with something or somebody very important, either to the characters or to the community, ends up dead. And then you have to bring it in. Now, I've also seen it where you're at a fair and you're just having fun. That's also a very common one I see a lot. And that is better for introducing you to the world. And then maybe everyone's having a good time, and then all of a sudden the big bad appears and crashes the place and kills someone, kills the mayor, and now you're brought on to help investigate. The point is,
sure, then you're literally the Stephen King stuff. Like, what were you going with the Dead Zone, where he's at the fair and then he gets put into a coma for years?
Yeah, no, actually, that was the beginning of the Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous in the video game. That's exactly what happens. Like, you're like at a fair, and a gigantic demon shows up, a dragon appears who's guarding the town, and the demon beheads the dragon, kills it, and there you go.
Yep. And then you fall into a giant pit.
Right.
That's how
I know. I was like,
everything happens by cutscene, and you fall into a pit in the written version.
Yeah, but the point is like, exactly, like that's a good way to start an adventure. The point is, if you're running a session 1 and you're the GM, you do have to make sure that you hook the players. You can't have a session where you're all doing shopping. And I've said this in my podcast probably every week, is that you need conflict. Without conflict, there's no story. I can go into this forever. All story is conflict. That's why combat works so well, because it automatically is conflict. You can't just have combat in a session 1, because that's not enough stakes. That's not enough to keep people hooked. You need conflict that's larger, like someone dying, or somebody getting kidnapped, or something like you have, like that's something that's taken away from you as a character. Like you need something to hook the players so that they're interested in the story and they want to come back for the second week. You can also do it physically. The best session 1 I ever had was again by Seth, and exactly what you said, Mark. We sat down, we found this like book, and then he handed us each this bound book that was like 100 pages in like parchment paper, gorgeous book that he did by hand, and then bound it and gave each of us a copy. And I was like, holy crap. And I was like, all right, I'm a hook, man. Like I'm just reading the book. I still have it. I have it in my drawer over there. It's so cool. And that was a game that we played from level 1 to 20, 4th edition D&D, no less. And it was great. And the book was sort of our guide through the adventure.
But you didn't make it to 30?
No. Well, I did become the
4th edition, so you have 30 in the core.
I became the handmaiden of Loth at the end of the adventure, so I was quite happy. That was okay. I had a very very good character arc on that one, but the point is that
as long as Loth was happy too.
Yes. Well, I was a reincarnation of her original handmaid, but I didn't know it, and then I find out later, and then I became it.
Oh, okay.
Anyhow, so I had a happy ending. I don't know how the other characters did. Someone became a dragon permanently, and then they flew off, and they were happy. So everyone had their own happy ending. They
flew up to Battle Zoo Ancestors Dragons.
There you go. Yeah, maybe. It's actually Seth's wife who did that. But the point is that you want to have a session where you sort of, as the GM and even the other players, you don't have to be the GM to do. It's the other player. You could say, hey guys, let's discuss this. Let's go through what we're going to be doing tonight, just so we're all on the same page. It's like saying, oh, let's go out to dinner. Well, what do you want? Do you want Chinese? Do you want Italian? Do you want a diner? It's like, yeah, it's just setting expectations. You're not ruining the excitement. You're just setting expectations so everyone has a good time. And then as the GM, you want to make sure that if you're not running a pre-published adventure or adventure path or a society, that you hook them. You got to hook them right away. And I'm not saying you have to hook them in the first 5 minutes, but you got to hook them by the first session. You got to make sure they're interested in the story. They're interested in what's going on. They're interested in finding out more, because if it doesn't grab them, I've seen many sessions don't go to session 2. Because they were just like, you lose one person and it's very easy to lose everyone. You have 4 people and it's like only 3 want to show up, then no one shows up. So,
and you'd always need, like you said, you always need some kind of a conflict, even if it's not a physical conflict. People who have conflicting needs or desires or wants, that's like when you're talking about playwriting or any of these kind of things, screenwriting. That's a scene. A scene is when 2 people have something conflicting that they want, and a negotiation will happen. And in tabletop RPGs, that negotiation might be a combat, but some kind of a negotiation or way of either compromise being reached, or one person bringing the other person to their way of thinking, or in tabletop RPG, defeating them in a duel or in some kind of a fight. That's what puts in tension, because you want to know which of the 2 worldviews, which of the 2 goals, which of the 2 desires in the scene is going to preside over you, whether that is, you know, a dragon guarding its hoard and the PCs trying to take its treasure, or, you know, someone who doesn't want to go to the party at the king's ball for their own reasons, that they just want to stay at home, and another person who wants them to come out and go to the ball. So like anytime you're making a scene, there has to be conflict.
Yeah, the other thing you can do, there is one exception to the conflict. You can do mystery. That one's harder, but actually the Indigo Isles, and this is giving anything away, the Indigo Isles opens with you getting half of a treasure map, and you are tasked to find the other half. So it's not necessarily conflict, but there is a mystery, or in this case, a scavenger hunt, and people love those as well.
Well, it's both, right? Yeah. Because there's an overarching mystery, but since it's a scavenger hunt, there's going to be conflict, right? Because wouldn't there be other people who are also looking for this treasure as well?
Yep, potentially.
So there is a conflict of interest. There's a timer on it. There's a question of, are we going to be the first ones who find this? And so there is sort of a built-in, that's just like a more nuanced way to deliver multiple scenes, each of which have conflict within the overarching plot line of the mystery. Because the overarching plot line doesn't always have to be a conflict. You could have an overarching plot line that's slice of life, that's about like, we're going to live our fantasy life, or, you know, we're going to build up a nation. But individually, there will be scenes and pieces of that involve conflicts, even if they're not violent conflicts, where two people's priorities don't meet. Like, for instance, when Linda was running Kingmaker, sure, all the things you expect from Kingmaker were in there because it's an adventure path. But also, we had a conflict that was between the Erastil people, who are like the lawful good, like very community, family focused, like traditionalist group, which our druid was a neutral good and like kind of a less lawful member of from our party of the Erastil church. And then the Callistrian church, which is chaotic neutral, like do what you want to do. Epicurean, seize the day, pleasure for yourself, kind of religion that was also very popular in our kingdom, and they were very much at odds. And they were like, so the people who were the Erastilites were often in the farms, and the Callistrians were often in the cities, and they would be like, don't come to our farms, bringing brochures and telling people to leave the farms and just go off to the cities, because we want them to stay in the farms. And so there was a conflict there where like nobody was the bad guy, but most of our party was pro like the chaotic, because we had Desna, which is had a good deity that some of us worshipped, but our druid was kind of, you know, he understood the conflict because he was in between in alignments, but he worshipped Erastil. So there's a lot of good drama that arose from that, even though ultimately it wasn't a story that was about that conflict as the main thing. It was just a conflict that created scenes, and it created an arc that was kind of underlying and that happened throughout.
And I'll say something else you want to do, and this is very tricky sometimes, is that you want to bring the characters together if you can in the first session. You do not, this is very important, do not want to have them have conflict with each other. If anything, you're doing everything in your power to make sure that they're working as a group. So as I said, like in our adventure path, like, you know, there's a treasure hunt, and suddenly it's like, and the first thing you ever do, if you've ever done a treasure hunt or a scavenger hunt, is like everyone has to work together. It's like immediately everyone has to start talking and working together as a group to figure out how to solve that problem. And everyone could bring something different to the table. And that's also why often these things start off with like a murder mystery or something, because it's like, oh, okay, you have a murder mystery. Okay, we have to figure out together why this person was murdered and how it affected us. It's usually like a friend or an uncle or like a leader, so everyone is in it together. Or you fall in a pit like in the Wrath of the Righteous, and you all got to figure out how to get out together, something like that you're all working together. And in fact, a good example of how not to do this of all things was Bob's Burgers. There was a very recent episode of Bob's Burgers this season where they were running a role-playing game, and it was a girl, and she asked if they can run it at Bob's Burgers restaurant. And she was really nervous, and it was her very first time running the adventure. And it was very interesting. I mean, if you have Hulu, you can check it out. I forgot the name of it. And she was really nervous. Not only was her first time running and there was new people, she was going to do something really weird. And what she did is, at the beginning of the adventure, they got hit by a spell. All their characters got changed into goblins, and then she gave them new character sheets, and they all had to run new character sheets. And they were pissed. They were really angry in the adventure. And she was all worried, and she was going to Bob and saying, I don't know if I'm doing this right. And I was like watching this, like, this is actually pretty fascinating, because at the end, they all came together and they solved it, and they all got their characters back. But in the episode, you actually see them like pretty upset that they lost their characters. Don't do that. Don't ever like mess with people's characters unless you really know them and you're your friends, they trust you. That is a big no-no. And even at the end of the episode, it's like, well, did you have fun? And they're all like, yeah, I guess. Like, I was like, and they're like, are we gonna do it again? Like, yeah, okay, we'll do it again. I was like, wow, like, I could see that could have gone really wrong. Like, do not.
You want to talk to your players about this first.
Yeah.
Like, I had a player in one game who I talked to him. I was like, so what's your paladin's backstory? And he's like, you know what? I think I have amnesia. You make something up that comes up down the line and surprise me. And even then, I was worried about the plot line that I had for his character, because his character was actually the BBEG, like the final boss, who had given himself amnesia, made sure he would be found by paladins because he wanted to become a paladin without any memories of his previous plan as part of his continued plan. And then he was actually a psychic type person, so his old memories like resurged, and then the paladin was able to use the power from the boss to like split off and become his own person later on. And I was worried during the big reveal that he might still be upset, even though he told me just do whatever. But he was like, no, that is so awesome, this is so good, I'm gonna take levels in Psychic Warrior now too, because now that I know that my character was originally this evil psychic type dude. So it worked out, but it was a big risk.
Yeah.
It was when there was a big reveal, and like he named his character Adam, and like the other person they thought was the big boss of the campaign's name was Lilith. And it turned out that she was working along with the original Adam, who was like, because Adam and Lilith as the first couple before Adam and Eve in like biblical lore. So
yeah.
And he's the one who picked the name. So I was like, okay, I can work with your amnesia on this, but it's super risky. And that was someone who asked me to do it, and I was feeling worried about it. If somebody doesn't ask you to, or you don't talk to them about it, you do not risk that.
That's the name of one of the gods in the Alucard universe, Lilith and Tova. They won't say who they are, but we have those names. I like those names a lot. So let's see, questions real quick. David Green asked, what is the most esoteric question a player has asked you? Well,
right, because I think that was in response to you saying that your players were super esoteric and they have a lawyer and they always ask you the most obscure questions.
I will tell you what they do. Actually, I will tell you what not they do, but someone else does. And they do this all the time. They will say to you, let me ask you something. What time of day is it? And obviously they're trying to fish for something. And I'm like, I don't know. It's like, it's noon. Like, oh, well, can I see the sun? Do you think the sun's out? Like, yeah, the sun's out. It's like, oh, okay. So you're saying there's not a cloud in the sky. It's like a nice sunny day. I'm like, yeah, sure. It's a nice sunny day. Okay. In that case, I'm doing A, B, C, D. I'm like, okay, stop doing that. Don't like fish for answers you're looking for. I hate when players do that. I always say, let me ask you. And then whenever someone says that, like, and it's not esoteric, but it could just be like, let me ask you, what's the weather? And I'll just say, what are you trying to do? Let's go backwards. You tell me what you're trying to do, and then I'll tell you what the weather is. And that drives me sort of like nuts, by the way. But
I mean, people tend to do that just in general. They want to know. It's not necessarily a tactic. It could be just for verisimilitude, as well, that they don't just ask only about the gameplay reason. But like, even when you're talking about something, like in an online, trying to rule on a ruling about like a disputed game rule, right? They're not going, if they find out that like whether or not the word counts as means one thing or another, and a certain feat means that you get like plus 20 more to hit. They're not going to ask you about that feat. They'll just be like, so counts as in general, what does that mean? Or they'll find a more innocuous thing to ask about where it doesn't matter. When they're and that's just how people do. And I think about it as like in the same way that like when you're trying to get a the front in a class action suit to a court, like you bring the one that like is like it seems like the easiest in the direction that you want, rather than like necessarily revealing the precedent that they're trying to set. I think that's just a tactic that people use.
Yeah, I don't know about an esoteric question, to be honest. There's so many I can't even like figure out. There's just I get a lot of weird questions. Normally things like bags of holding, things that are hard to envision. Those are usually where the esoteric and the strange questions come from. It's never like, oh, if I swing the sword, will I cut the rope? It's like, of course you will. But like, okay, I got a bag of holding. If I put a bag of holding and I fill it with a bucket of water, could I then empty the bag of holding and use it as a fire hose? Okay, that's actually a good question. I'm like, sure. Like if you fly and you angle it or something, like, that those are like the weird ones usually when it comes to magic, because magic is there's no real world examples, so you got to figure it out using your brain and your imagination. So those are the ones I get, and not a lot of questions today. In fact, comments. But no questions.
They did point out that it's Judaic mythology, not technically biblical lore about Adam and Lilith. That is correct.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of surrounding Judaic mythology that is maybe not necessarily literally in the Bible.
Well, it isn't the Bible. It depends which Bible you're talking about. Well, sure.
It depends on which ones you consider apocryphal versus not. Correct. That is also true.
That's right.
Absolutely.
So when you said Bible, I was like, okay.
Yeah, that's what I use the words biblical lore to mean, like not directly. I meant like including apocrypha lore, like as in like scattered stuff, but that may have had another meaning to some of the people in the comments. So I do want to point out it absolutely is part of the broader mythology and is not always considered to be one of the core Bible books.
So if anyone else,
I don't think we have a lot more questions. Maybe we gave a very thorough summary of what to do with session 1.
I guess everyone was just
all right. Well, thanks so much for watching us again, everybody. And we finished our series of -1, 0, and 1. No point in doing how to run a successful session 2.
We're doing we're gonna do session 2, session 3, session 4.
No, Steven, stop. We need a new topic.
We do need a new topic. I know. I have a lot. I have actually a lot.
Yeah, there's Steven's full of great topics, so we're gonna have something great for you next week.
Yeah, next week
it won't be session 2, I promise. No, but I'm not showing up if it's session 2.
Actually, we might have a guest
because all we did was shop for 2 hours, like Seth.
I know.
And so now I'm not gonna show up for a session 2.
That's what happens. That's what happens. No, but I think we might have a guest next week.
Oh, maybe. Awesome.
Yeah, you don't even know about that. Somebody reached out to me and wants to be on the show. But
well, I mean, I'm happy to. I like having a guest. Guests are fun.
Oh, this is a fun guest. And don't forget, like the video if you see what you like. Don't forget subscribe. Right now we're doing it at 2:00. I still can't tell if it's a good time or not. It's like at night. I think night's not that great because everyone's busy. People are like eating dinner, playing games. It's like night's pretty tricky. But someone did right at the very end. How Julian?
Or they gave a suggestion for session session Omega.
Oh, that's a good one. That is an excellent idea, and that is tough. And we're not doing it next. Well, I don't know, maybe that might be a good way to wrap it up, or we do it later. But the last sessions are really hard, by the way, and not a lot of people have experience doing them because usually most games just die. I hate to say it, but it's true. So you never actually have a last session. But I run Adventure Paths, and we have last sessions, and you can listen to them. The podcast, we have multiple last sessions. You can actually hear on the Roll for Combat podcast how we end our sessions and how they, you know, how we resolve them. So that's really tough. But that's actually a very good topic. But anyhow, yeah. So do check that out. Do check it out, Roll for Combat. If you want to listen to podcasts, check it out Battle Zoo. If you want to see the books and get them before they go up in price, until they're officially released, which means like it's no longer quote a Kickstarter, which is only a few more months, and then everything will be done. You can get them at a discounted price. And the Dragon Ancestry book, I am shooting for it to come out in March. It's done more or less, but we have to edit it. There's a lot of editing that has to get done. And we're also still doing RPG Superstar, which is taking up a lot of time. There's a lot going on in March. I don't think we're ever not going to be busy. It's like, oh boy, February sure was busy. Oh, now March is really bad. Oh, and then April's good. Every month's going to be busy. Every month. Forever. It's just like Paizo, right? Is this what it was like when you were there, Mark? Every month busy?
Yeah, I would say that Paizo was just sometimes even more so, just because it has so many products.
Well, that's the thing.
Whereas in Battle Zoo, though, there's fewer people, so
Yes.
you know, it cancels out.
It cancels out. Well, and fewer products. You don't have to worry about 50 products yet.
Yes, that's the thing.
Yet. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week with another show.
All right, bye.